I am a big fan of podcasts, ranging from anime ones that don't exist anymore because of their leaders being selfish, incompetent twats, to sports podcasts such as The Herd with Colin Cowherd, or The Starters on NBA TV. More frequently, however, I am listening to some sort of gaming podcast, and my second favorite one to watch live or listen to about a day or so afterwards is the Weapon Wheel podcast, hosted by Broken Games HD, who's now known as Brooklyn Skill Tree. In case you're wondering, my favorite gaming podcast is Easy Allies, the former staff of the recently closed Game Trailers. One topic often discussed on Weapon Wheel, and I use the term discuss loosely, are exclusives. Specifically, Black Bond and Hard 8 Times, two members of the podcast, often claim that the Xbox has no exclusives. And now you may assume that when I say no exclusives, I'm referring to quality, but that's not what they're talking about. Black Bond doesn't have an Xbox and can't really talk about the quality of the games released on the system, because he doesn't really play them, and Hard 8, as far as I know, barely plays his Xbox, at least that's what he said on episode 71 of the podcast. When the phrase no exclusives is thrown around, these two mean the Xbox has no games that are not considered multi-plat, or games able to be found on other platforms. An argument often used to debate this fallacy is that the Xbox One, now sharing its exclusives with the PC, has console exclusives, exclusives that are able to be found on Xbox but not PS4 or vice versa. However, both Bond and Hard 8 always dismiss this claim with the same excuse: if it's on more than one platform, it's not exclusive. And while under some abnormally contrived logic I can understand that, their reasoning actually disproves their claim. When stating their claim, both guys say that the definition of exclusive means on one platform, which would be fine if the word exclusive simply meant one, but it doesn't. Exclusive, as defined by Merriam-Webster, ironically the dictionary Hard 8 himself told a guest on the podcast to check, is an adjective, which means to be excluding or having the power to exclude. It is also defined as excluding others from participation. It is also defined as single or sole, but when these terms are used, they are referring to a single or sole group, not an individual entity. What does this mean? Well, it means that the Xbox does have exclusives because it has games that are excluded from consumers of other platforms. Sunset Overdrive is an exclusive in the typical sense, but so are Gears of War 4 and ReCore, because they are excluded from PlayStation 4 owners. On the PS4, Persona 5, despite also being on the PS3, is an exclusive because it excludes the Xbox and PC fanbase from participation. The concept of the term console exclusive does exist. It's just not the term to describe this concept. Black Bond also mentioned this on episode 71 of the podcast when he stated that he believes that Destiny is closer to the idea of a console exclusive because it's inaccessible on PC, and that would be correct. That would be a console exclusive, but that doesn't mean that the Xbox, a console whose games are widely spread on the PC platform, does not have exclusives. Not only does the Xbox have exclusives, but the concept of the widely regarded definition of a console exclusive and the actual concept of a console exclusive both exist by definition, the argument both guys use to disprove the existence of what they believe to be a fallacy. So now that I've proven that they exist, how do we categorize these exclusives? Honestly, I think the community has done a good job with naming these categories thus far. Earlier, I mentioned that exclusive can also mean sole, but in the sense that there is a sole group and not an individual. I brought this up because the term Microsoft exclusive is something that is justified by this definition. Microsoft, specifically the Windows Store on PC and Xbox, are one entity. That's the point of Xbox Play Anywhere and the universal Windows platform. Xbox is not a console, it's a platform, which is why that terrible recording software, Xbox DVR, exists on your copy of Windows 10. So, games that only come out on the Microsoft platform, aka the Xbox, are Microsoft exclusives because they are excluding PlayStation 4 owners. Games that only come out on Sony platforms are Sony exclusives. However, that term is not going to be used very often because the Vita's dead, so the majority of games that fall under that category are actually just PlayStation 4 exclusives. Games that only come out on consoles like Destiny are console exclusives, and lastly, games that only come out on PC are PC exclusives. Yes, those exist. I hope I was able to clarify all of this because I was getting irritated with Hard 8's attacks on guests and members of the podcast that use the term console exclusive. I was even more irritated by his continual defense of his point, using incorrect evidence and people supporting his logic because of his alpha, extremely aggressive and satirical attitude. I don't have anything against the members of the podcast, I just hate the spread of misinformation, which is ironic considering that this podcast is often quoted for saying that they dispel misinformation, but accidentally often deliver less slanderous but still false information on subjects like Just Dance being the first game announced for the Nintendo Switch when it was actually Dragon Quest XI and 10. Or, specifically talked about in this episode, saying navigating the Xbox's friends list is more contrived than it needs to be when it only requires a button to be double-tapped. Like I said earlier, nothing personal against members of the podcast, just letting them know, assuming that they see this video, that 1. The term exclusives aren't as limited and defined as you think they are, and 2. That more research needs to be done before topics are spoken of on the podcast, or at least have a correction segment like Easy Allies has so that misinformation that is accidentally spread can at least be corrected so that we don't believe the first game announced for Nintendo's last shot at home console gaming is a f***ing dance game, and so the spread of false information is limited. That's all. Hope this video clarified some stuff and relatively small improvements are made to the podcast in due time. Thanks for watching. If you disliked, let me know. If you liked, let me know. Deuces!